Got me? Okay, and this Bluetooth that I'm using, is this what I'm going to talk on, or talk into the computer? Okay, so I'll just continue. You tell me when you're ready. Testing 3, 2, 1. Okay, well, hello everyone. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there in person. I think that what you're doing is important, and I would like to be supportive in any way that I can. My talk today is about how the JFK research community can improve its effectiveness. And some of you may think, well, where does he get the temerity to even talk about that? I have spoken to one of your conferences live and one remote, and I am very interested in the work that you do. I am essentially an outsider. As many of you know, I'm an investigative journalist by profession, and I came to the whole Kennedy research area fairly recently as a result of the work that I did on my book, Family of Secrets. Now, I was researching the Bush family. I was not researching the Kennedy assassination, but essentially I became interested in some facts of George H.W. Bush's life that led me into this area, beginning basically with his claim that he could not remember where he was on November 22, 1963. And as a result, simultaneous with my doing research on the Bush family, I began doing research on the Kennedy assassination. And my book, Family of Secrets, has about 4 or I think it's 5 chapters of largely new material relating to the assassination, particularly as connects with George H.W. Bush and his milieu. In any case, since I've completed the book, by the way, I went in, and I think this is very, very important, that I went in with an open mind. I pride myself on doing my work without an agenda. I think that if you go into any kind of research with a very, very fixed idea of what you will find or what you want to find, the results are invariably going to be tainted. And I really was just collecting a lot of facts and trying to connect the dots, if you will. In any case, several years now since Family of Secrets came out, I'm glad to say that the large majority of what I have in there has been borne out. We haven't had any kind of significant corrections. There were several very, very small errors, mostly a couple of things where we said that someone had gone to one university when they'd actually gone to another. But in terms of the core of the material, and particularly the Kennedy material, it's stood up quite well. But now I've had a chance to kind of look a little bit at what response there was to this work from the JFK researcher community, and I have to say I was quite disappointed because our sense was that Family of Secrets contained a great deal of new and important information. I had thought that there would be a widespread interest in it, and that folks would communicate with each other, would talk about it, would build on it, and would try to link it to other work being done out there. I think it's very, very important to work in a collaborative way, to share information, to discuss information, and to try to build some kind of a coherent and meaningful whole. And I think my own experience at seeing that not happen with this body of work indicates to me, explains to me a little bit about why it is that even at this late date, the public still is so fragmented, so confused, has trouble understanding even the basics of what has already been established. And so I'd really like to talk a little bit about that over the course of the next 20 minutes or so, see if we can leave some time for questions, if I can figure this technology out and how I'm supposed to get the questions. First of all, I am looking at a few notes here, so if my eyes are moving around, that's why. I see 3 or 4 deficiencies, if you will, in the way that people work together or don't work together in this community. And I would say one of them is essentially a kind of a solo approach by researchers. Now, understandably, ego certainly comes into many, many pictures, and it comes in here too. But I see not a great deal of effort of researchers to work with each other, and I've experienced this firsthand because I've reached out to quite a few people along the way, and even since the book has come out. Some have been very, very interested in talking and sharing. Particularly Peter Dale Scott, with whom I've become quite good friends. Peter and I actually did a joint event not too long ago at a bookstore in San Francisco, and I'm very, very pleased with the way that we share material, send things up and back, refer people, and so forth. I'd like to encourage much more of that. The second thing is kind of a constant criticism of others, and I think you all know what I'm talking about. I get emails all the time, instead of sort of praising all of the new material I brought out, kind of saying, well, this thing is technically wrong, and why didn't you do that, and so on. And I don't think that that's that helpful. I think that's helpful as part of a larger effort to cooperate with people, however. The third thing is that I see a lot of people take what I would call a kind of a hobbyist approach to this, a very narrow approach, almost like somebody who collects a particular kind of car and is only interested in that. That people seem to be very, very interested in, say, ballistics, or what happened in Mexico City, or what happened in New Orleans, or to Oswald's theory and so forth, and focus almost exclusively on that. Now, I understand why you would do that from a research standpoint, but ultimately, if our objective is to try to advance public understanding of American history and of this absolutely seminal event, we've got to be able to not only focus on specific things, but to build links between our work and that of others. And at the conclusion of my remarks, I'll suggest a few ways that we could do that, and particularly ways I'd love to have people interact at least with me and the work that I do. And then sometimes I almost get a sense that people who have been deeply involved in the issue for so long almost don't even really want it solved. They just kind of enjoy doing it. And of course, that's not where I'm coming from. I would like to see this thing solved. So that, I think, is very, very important. Now, what to do about that? First of all, it seems to me that it would be important to establish as many points of commonality as possible, things that we can agree on, instead of the current either intentional or accidental chaos that I think prevails. There are a lot of talented people around, well-meaning and smart. We don't necessarily all play well with others, but I think we have to make more of an effort. And I have again begun recently reaching out to a few people and asking them if they would like to work with me on developing things, linking things, figuring things out. And it seems to me that if we could work on a few sets of facts and kind of figure out what it is that we can agree on those, and perhaps even find a way to publish them communally, that would be very, very important, particularly as we're coming up on the 50th anniversary. I am seeing patterns everywhere. When I wrote Family of Secrets, I was fairly cautious in drawing conclusions, and I would just invite the reader to figure out what they thought things might mean. Since then, I've increasingly come to the realization that it's almost impossible statistically and logically to dismiss this enormous body of facts that we have and to accept them as coincidence. And I think that those who do at this point really, we have to take a hard look at them and what their motivations are. Just a few things that I focused on in Family of Secrets that I've gotten some more information on, or that I think clearly are solid ground and worth developing. As you may know if you read the book, I was very interested in the relationship between George H.W. Bush and a whole bunch of figures who were in Dallas on November 22, or were in that general orbit. All of those connections I would encourage people to look at again. They seem to be quite significant. One figure that I looked at extensively, a fellow named Jack Creighton, C-R-I-C-H-T-O-N, who was the head of a military intelligence unit in Dallas, operating from an underground communications bunker in Dallas that day. That struck me as something that people would pick up on. I'm quite surprised that other than Peter, I really haven't seen anybody run with that. George de Mohrenschildt, I was not the first person to look at him. Many other people have, some very extensively. But I think I created a new set of connections and some new coherence to him and his relationships with both George H.W. Bush and with Lee Harvey Oswald. And I think that the de Mohrenschildt material, I know several people are working on books about him, but I'm afraid that these may not go in the direction of creating greater clarity of what happened that day. So I think Creighton, I think de Mohrenschildt are very important. I think the Texas School Book Depository itself is very important. And again, if you've read Family of Secrets, you know that I started from scratch with a lot of things. I just wanted to know, for example, what was the Texas School Book Depository? And one of the revelations for me, and perhaps for a lot of you who did read Family of Secrets, was that this building was really not the Texas School Book Depository. It was a building with another name, into which a company called the Texas School Book Depository Company moved in, a kind of a skeleton staff, not that long prior to the assassination. And I was deeply intrigued by that because it became very clear to me that that company had no legitimate business reason to move into that building, and that the man who ran it had his own military intelligence connections, and that in fact even in the fall of any year, and particularly 1963, they really were not in a growth mode. They usually were seasonal, and they laid off the vast majority of their employees. There really was no reason for them to have hired Lee Harvey Oswald, in my determination, except that basically they were told to do that for reasons other than business. I even had an opportunity to look at, the common story is, oh, Oswald got his job because he was referred by someone else who was working there. Well, that someone else, it turns out, only got his job there a very short time before Oswald, and in fact had moved to Dallas specifically to take this very unexceptional and low-ranking job. And so that seemed to me, based on my couple of decades of covering covert operations, to be a classic cover operation. In other words, they needed to put Oswald in the building, and they needed a kind of a indirect route. And so first they would need to get this other guy who was connected to Mrs. Payne, who had her own intelligence connections. And then once that fellow was in, he then brought Oswald in. This very effectively, to this day, has prevented much of the community from looking at really why Oswald was there. And as I say, I think this is one of the most important smoking guns that needs to be developed. Obviously also who the owner of the building was, and the fact that he conveniently was out of the country at the time of the shooting, was never interviewed by the Warren Commission. I also found very important links between George de Mohrenschildt, not only as an old friend of George H.W. Bush, who was, as I reveal in Family of Secrets, working for the CIA in the early 1960s undercover with his oil company, but that George de Mohrenschildt was connected to Oswald. George de Mohrenschildt also knew all these other people. Another very important fact I revealed in Family of Secrets was that in the fall of 1962, as Oswald was being handled and passed along within this Russian expatriate community, he was linked up with George de Mohrenschildt, who then promptly created a new charity, and the people on his charity board are all potential suspects. One of them was the wife of D. Harold Byrd, the man who owned the building from which Oswald would purportedly fire the shots. And so you can see something significant coming together there. And again, I'm just quite astonished that several years later, if I go on the various websites, which admittedly I don't do that often, but I do go on occasionally, where many of you participate in discussions and chats, I see extremely little on this. People are very eager to just, someone will post some of this material and someone else will just see an opportunity to snipe at someone or make a joke, and they move right on. I'm just sort of incredulous that this material is not being built upon. So there are quite a few things, especially between the abundance of intelligence and military-industrial complex connected figures mapping out their exact relationships with each other and where they were at key moments. Another thing I dealt with in Family of Secrets are these two memos related to George H.W. Bush and Dallas 1963, One, this memo probably all of you know about, the J. Edgar Hoover memo, referring to a briefing related to Cuban exiles and the assassination. Now that memo, which has been around for a long time, I'm surprised nobody has done more with that, and it has occurred to me actually since the publication of Family of Secrets that the very fact that Hoover wrote this kind of almost nonsensical memo, the memo itself doesn't make a lot of sense, because it basically says the State Department in the wake of the assassination has asked us in the FBI to check with the Cuban exile community and see if any of them might be planning to hatch an invasion of Cuba with the assassination as an excuse. Well, that's kind of pretty improbable. They wouldn't be doing anything without coordination with the American intelligence community. So I took that memo itself to be some kind of a red flag from Hoover in this sort of internecine warfare between the different agencies, all of which appear to have had some kind of culpability or links to Oswald. And so the mere fact that Hoover put this memo into government records and that he named George Bush of the CIA specifically as somebody getting a briefing, I think that Hoover somehow was flagging Bush's awareness or involvement in something related to the assassination. And I think we need to do much more with that. I wrote about a Pepsi, about a rather soft drink bottlers convention in Dallas, and there's a wonderful photo in Family of Secrets in our photo gallery there, where you could actually see Kennedy's car going down the street in a motorcade, and there was traffic passing by it in the opposite lane, which is astonishing, obviously a violation of all the protocols of security, and that's very interesting. But also interesting is that this public bus, where I assume anybody on the bus could have shot Kennedy right out of the window there, had a big advertising poster on the side welcoming to Dallas these bottlers, who mostly were a very right-wing bunch, who were quite angry at Castro over sugar prices and eager to overthrow him. And there were something like, I think it was 8,000 of these strangers were in Dallas at this very time. Now, the failure of the JFK assassination community to find that interesting, that if you look through these books that have been around forever about the Kennedy assassination, there's nothing practically other than maybe a very brief mention about this convention. But I mean, the fact that they were timed at the same time is very significant, because it basically would have made it impossible to really assess huge numbers of strangers coming in and out of Dallas. And I think the bottlers issue needs to be studied. Also, Donald Kendall, who was the head of Pepsi, and again in Family of Secrets I go into Richard Nixon's embarrassed presence in Dallas that morning, that he, I think correctly, was mortified to find that he had been invited and would be there when his former chief rival was gunned down. I don't think Nixon was complicit in it, but I think he was deliberately brought to Dallas partially as a way of showing him that when he was president, he might remember what happened to presidents who strayed too far from that kind of military-industrial consensus. That, I think, is extremely important, and people ought to do more research on it. Hello? Okay, am I back live again? Okay, so I was talking about the Bottlers Association, and okay, if you can all hear me, I'll just continue then. And what I was saying was, yeah. And so I think that the whole fact that the Bottlers Convention was scheduled for Dallas in that week is itself quite possibly something to look at in terms of are you there? Can you hear me? I think I lost you again. Hello? Okay, do we have another ad again? Okay, so what I was saying was that the bottlers convention, which interested me enormously. Hello? 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 Okay. So everyone can hear me now, see me okay? All right. So as regards the bottlers, I was very interested in that, and what I've got in Family of Secrets, I think, is mostly new, and I would encourage people to look at that because I think the fact that Kennedy ended up coming to Dallas at the same time that there was this conference with these thousands of strangers, the fact that the president of Pepsi, Donald Kendall, managed to recruit Richard Nixon to his board and persuade Nixon to come to Dallas that very week to encourage Nixon to call a press conference to criticize Kennedy. I think all of these things need to be looked at. Kendall's own interest in American intervention abroad against leaders like Allende, who he didn't like, and the role of large American companies traditionally. I'm hearing noise. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I think there's a great deal of very productive material there to be examined more carefully. Since we don't have a lot of time left, I'm going to go on, but I do think that's very important. Another related thing is the fact that George H.W. Bush and Jack Creighton, who I mentioned earlier, the military, one being military intelligence, the other being non-military intelligence. I think the fact that they were the Republican candidates for governor and senator that year is not insignificant. The fact that they knew each other well, the fact that the man who was the chairman of the then very small Texas Republican Party, who supposedly persuaded the two of them to run for office, and then, as I reveal in Family of Secrets, the fact that the family foundation of that man was itself later identified and not challenged as a CIA funding conduit. How can we ignore these things? I mean, I think you're looking at there some potential kind of funding for the operation itself. Again, that's another thing that just has been generally ignored in the research community. Another thing which is not in Family of Secrets but has come out recently, and I think this is quite important, is the recording, as many of you may know, LBJ also had a recording system in the White House, and this is a phone call from the columnist Joseph Alsop pressuring LBJ to convene the Warren Commission, and LBJ is resisting, and he wants a Texas-based investigation. But I think that's very, very important. And in the end, LBJ basically does what Alsop essentially tells him to do. Alsop, famously close with all of these key figures in the intelligence community. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that was his job to tell Johnson to do this. And what that means, I'm not sure exactly. It makes you wonder how much Johnson did know exactly about what was going on, or whether he just was understanding things intuitively and from a bit of a distance. Joe Alsop, very important figure, also was very close to John F. Kennedy and was the person who provided a place where Kennedy could come and have some of his trysts. There are a number of these figures who, Ben Bradley and so forth, who were friends of Kennedy, but also friends of the very people in the intelligence community who were deeply alarmed by what Kennedy was doing and who wanted him out. People who Kennedy had fired as a result of the Bay of Pigs fiasco. So I think all of those connections need to be looked at. In closing and moving toward some questions, if you do have questions, I think we need to look at the willful failures of the media to cover any of these kinds of revelations. As you know, major institutions like the New York Times and CBS and what have you, basically just don't cover anything about the assassination, except for sort of gossipy little things about Jackie that don't get us anywhere. If you go to our website, as you may know, I run a non-profit investigative news site called WhoWhatWhy, those three words, WhoWhatWhy.com. And on the site, if you go up to the carousel that moves at the top, click on a story we have about the New York Times' Ostrich Act on the JFK assassination and the way that they continue to ignore revelations, even when they covered, I know Jeff Morley spoke to your conference, even when they reported on some legal breakthroughs in trying to obtain information relating to Mexico City, right in the lead of the article, clearly some editor forced in some comment that kind of watered down the impact of what the reporter was trying to say. I think we need to look very, very hard at the media itself, in part, of course, because of Operation Mockingbird and the intention of that circle to control the media itself, which I think is still going on, either overtly or in a much more sub rosa kind of way, in a less official sort of way. But I think we still see many, many individuals in the media whose job it is, or at least whose proclivity it is, to just block all serious discussion of these matters. And this gets to what I was talking about at the beginning, how crucial it is to figure out why this incredible information that you all dig up, that you all read about, is not known to the great mass of the public. Here's another thing. I see that the 6th Floor Museum is having some events. And, you know, my question was, what the heck is the 6th Floor Museum? Who's behind that? What is their agenda? And I can tell you that when I approached them, and clearly I've got some interesting things to say about the assassination, they sort of cleared their throat and had some technical excuse of why they couldn't have me, why they couldn't feature Family of Secrets at the museum. I think the 6th Floor Museum itself is part of the cover-up. And I think that if you see that it was funded privately by the Dallas City Fathers, the very people who didn't like Jack Kennedy and were connected to Mayor Cobble and his brother, fired by JFK and so on, I think that we need to look at the obstructionary institutions themselves and try to really let the public understand what's going on. Perhaps maybe the museum will see this and suddenly see that maybe they're going to have to fess up or start seriously dealing with this material. It'll be interesting to observe that. So anyway, moving forward, I would like, among other things, to offer our website, WhoWhatWhy.com, as a kind of a serious rallying point for those who do play well with others, for those who do want to see some real progress in solving this thing. I personally am very interested in hearing from those who may have information or who would like to collaborate. Speaking as an author and an investigative journalist, I'm always interested in the help of those who are good at research. I'm happy to work closely with you, to guide you wherever I can in technical aspects of investigative reporting. Sometimes researchers they're very good at certain aspects of research, but they don't have some of the essential investigative reporter toolkit, and I'm happy to provide that. Well, so in any case, whether it's with me or it's with other people, I'd love to see authors cooperate with each other, share this information, and try to map out some kind of a coherent final narrative of what we do know and how we think these events went down, both on November 22 and in the period leading up to it, and also in the cover-up that has continued ever since. So those are really my remarks. Thank you very much. If you've got any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Yeah. Yes. Well, I mean, I've told this story before. Obviously, he did an enormous amount of work. I bought his CD, and I reached out to him. I actually traveled all the way to see him in his town, and I don't really want to get into casting aspersions on people, but that is not one easy individual to work with. He has a tremendous mass of documents and things, but unfortunately, and I may be the only person who actually tried to read through the whole thousands of pages of it, it's very, very difficult to find the needles in that haystack. He's not a journalist, and he doesn't seem to understand what's significant and what isn't. I did reach out to him. In fact, he's mentioned in the book and the work that he did, but the reality was that he, for personal reasons, doesn't trust people, didn't trust me, and basically wasn't even willing to shake my hand because he suspected. I don't really want to go there, but I mean, they're very strange things, and I can't be responsible for other people. I'd love to talk to him. As I say, I made that really extensive effort to do so, and he's not the only one. There are others who would say things like, you know, I've spent my whole life on this, I don't want to share it, I'm sick of this, I'm not really doing anything more. There are a whole plethora of reasons that people don't cooperate with others. Yes, hi. Yeah, hi, Paul. You know what? I mean, I had heard that, and I'm sorry to say that maybe with just so many different things on my plate, I remember starting to look at that and trying to figure out the credibility of that, and I don't recall that I had the opportunity to get all the way through on that. But I would encourage you and anybody else who has any of these things to please contact me. There are email contacts on the WhoWhatWhy website. They're also on the there's also a familyofsecrets.com website. You can contact me via that. Please feel free at any time to point out passages in books, new breakthroughs, whatever. I will look at them. I will get back to you. All of these things are important, and they all need to be checked out. No, I'm sorry, can you restate that? You know, there are indications that he is, you know, getting on in years, showing signs of that. I think that the Bush family cannot be written off at all. With the Republican Party putting up such a gallery of clowns as they have this year, figures like Jeb Bush end up having a great deal of appeal. And I think they are preparing to run Jeb, certainly in 2016. And frankly, I wouldn't rule out the possibility that he would get a draft in 2012. So I think they're very much in the picture. You know, Poppy to me was the most important of them, but he's not the only one. Okay, thank you. They wanted to know, what's that like really, really large mouse that's walking by, and you can hear those creaking floorboards. Hello? Hello? Ah, did you pick up that joke? Okay, sorry. All right. I was just telling somebody who just walked by and made a tremendous amount of noise not to. Okay. Have a good day, all of you. Okay.